Hello everyone, welcome to Field Notes, an exploration of functional medicine. I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital.
And we are fortunate enough to have Elise Spofford in Inilchik, Alaska. She is a massage therapist and a yoga instructor and has a lot of interesting and illuminating ideas to share with us about her areas of skill and what it means to deploy and live by those strategies here in Alaska. So welcome, Elise.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, Dr. Downey. I'm excited for our thoughtful and hopefully insightful conversation.
Right. We can't make promises, right? We can only share our passion and hope that that's what goes out there. I'm confident.
Absolutely.
I'm excited too, and confident there will be a lot that will be of value to people, and it's valuable for you to give your time. So,
thanks.
In reviewing your qualifications a bit and certification, you got certified in yoga in 2010, and then wrapped up massage therapy 2013. You're continuing your studies with another advanced yoga teacher, and you also do a lot outdoors. You lead trips in the summer, love life outside, love activities with family here in Alaska.
Absolutely.
Are there things I should add that you would add to your bio that are important that I didn't share yet?
Well, I just think it's wonderful to be a part of something that's integrative, and I really appreciate living here on the Kenai in Alaska, and I work locally at our health club, but I've had the privilege of going into schools and being a part of kind of business wellness plans with yoga, with mindfulness practices. I both appreciate working with clients one-on-one in the massage therapy realm. About half of my clients come to me with concerns, whether they have acute or chronic pain, and it's fun to be a part and facilitate that healing process together. And then I love and appreciate the group dynamics of my yoga classes in the community that we have as well. And of course, everything has shifted here in the midst of a lot of change for us locally and internationally during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it'll be fun to talk about those shifts and changes. I mean, it hasn't, in many ways, has not been fun. It's been challenging, but at the same time, I think if we can look at life's windings and changes as opportunities or other things that might open, then that's beneficial as well. So we can
right on
move down those streams as well together.
Right on. Thank you. Well, it'll be really good, I think, to talk about what you see in those different settings, and also some specific things you're doing right now for the Inilchik clinic community in terms of yoga at their desk, mindfulness to cope with stress, etc. But to set the stage, as it were, then were you always interested in yoga and massage, or how did you get to the point you personally valued this enough that you decided to gather skills in it and to be certified?
So yoga was not a part of my vocabulary when I was small, although I distinctly remember being on my living room floor as a child and kind of bringing my legs up overhead, doing a shoulder stand, and how just what relief it brought to be able to stretch and move. I've always been an athlete. As a young person, my family played tennis, and then throughout high school and college, I was a volleyball player. And then kind of in my 20s, geared towards triathlons. So I really have always loved the physicality of movement. And I think initially that is what brought me to my mat. Although I had reservations at first, just about being able to be still for 60 minutes. And I, as it often happens in life, had a lot of people around me inviting me to yoga classes. And yet it was when I was 28 when I first went to my yoga class. At that time, in my 20s, I was traveling the world, doing a lot of volunteering, especially in Latin America. I have a background in Spanish, and it was in San Juan del Sur, Nicaragua, where I took my first yoga class. And I remember after that class coming out in a space that felt very clear and very relaxed. It was a flow-based class, and so there was a lot of physicality and movement, and at the same time, through these postures, these yoga poses, something internally quieted. You know, I hadn't even noticed how busy I was inside until I left the room and went about into my evening. And I just remember that night, the sunset, and things feeling more alive, that I had an awareness that I previously hadn't had. And so it was kind of an aha moment, you know, and I think there are many aspects of life that can awaken us to what is right in front of us, what is in our midst. And that was my first yoga class. Ironically enough, it was a year later that I returned to San Juan del Sur, and I finished my yoga certification with the School Yoga Institute. They're based in California, but they run a lot of their teacher trainings as intensives around the world. Right now, they are bringing everything online. So even though a lot of our options seem to be closing down, but things are opening up too. You know, we have access to teachers and trainings wherever we are now, more than any time before, I think. So yeah, that was the beginning of my kind of yoga teaching, and I tend to teach a number of styles. I have always had my hands, or I describe myself as having hands in many different pots. Yoga has so many different practices. There are practices that link breath to movement. I had talked about vinyasa classes, which are geared around sun salutations. And these are more kind of strengthening, power building classes. But then we have the restorative classes, and we have the yin classes. And I have come to value those as much, if not even more, as I kind of sift through all of the stimuli we have on our shoulders, all of the influx of information all of the time, that when we can come to a practice that invites us to breathe a little more deeply and to move out of the sympathetic nervous system and into the parasympathetic, there is inherent value. And I think as I age too, those aspects are becoming more valuable to me. There was just, yeah, it's been a really wonderful trajectory, and I'm excited to see where I'll go on the yoga front. Massage came a few years later, after I had my daughter in 2013, and again I was able to study this time with a school out of Grand Junction, Colorado, where I did a lot of the academic portion here in Alaska, and then went to Grand Junction for my practicum. So both have felt like they complement each other really well, and yet in and of themselves, it's been wonderful to kind of develop in different ways and to take a step at a time. And you had mentioned the Ninilchik Traditional Council here. Here in Ninilchik, I have kind of presented them a number of times with ideas, you know, on ways that we can make the workplace a place where we practice self-care, that we value our employees, not only their output, but that we value them as individuals. We want to provide support networks for them. So in the last year, I've been offering chair massages to our employees, and it's been well received. I'm fully booked all of the time, which is I'm grateful for. And more recently, we've kind of shelved the chair massage appointments for now, and I have moved into a role of offering desk yoga and mindfulness classes. And so it's looking to be a break in the day, a lunch break, where we join together and we talk a little bit about what it is to sit with all that we have in a moment. We often think that we are well in control of our life, and yet when we sit and we breathe into a quieter place, in a nanosecond, something infiltrates, you know. So we realize that there are fluctuations all of the time, and yet how do we meet ourselves in that space? You know, what do we open up to? What are we willing to look at face value? And so that's been fun as well.
I'm really glad for the people that you teach and the people that you serve that it brings peace and it brings clarity. It's always important, but I think right now people have a thirst, a really specific thirst to feel a sense of peace and a way to not tune out but not be overwhelmed. There's this dilemma a lot of individuals are sort of facing, and given that I think there's a bit of an American cultural default to either sort of tune out and ignore or get overwhelmed.
Yeah, or it's a conversation of the two, right? It's leaning in and then knowing when we need to rest it, and and then giving that break, but then having the courage to come back. It's kind of this dance, hopefully, that we are participants and we engage, and yet there are times, noticing when we're getting overwhelmed and then stepping back for a moment. You're just talking right now about stressors reminded me of just different things that affected me when I was younger. I was allergic to cats and dogs. For a time, it felt like in my 20s when I was real active, just this adrenaline rush. It felt like every 3 weeks or so, I would hit this bottom, and I would, what would manifest for me is a respiratory overhaul. I would sneeze. It was like I had caught a sudden cold, and I think it was my body just saying, you need to rest, you need to stop. Another story, I lived in Japan right after college. I was teaching English for 3 years on the JET program there. And the first year, inexplicably, on 4 different occasions, I broke out into hives. And, kind of looking back on how our body, I think, responds to stress. The symptoms that we have is our body's language of communicating with us. If we can choose to lean in and listen and kind of respond attentively, I think we are much better off. And I'm getting better at, trying to, I don't want to say manage, but lean into this conversation of what's in this moment, what's best, and then to operate from that standpoint. But it takes courage to lean in and to be there and to notice and to acknowledge. It's kind of this radical acknowledging of where we are at. So
my friend in Montana used to call it radical acceptance of what is.
Yes.
Which I found very succinct. And a couple of the things I was thinking about while you were talking are that it's always fascinating for many of us to reflect on illness or signs or symptoms as metaphors for processes. So going into immune storms and having hives, and then being at a point in one's life where there's disarray and a need for peace, a need for equanimity, is particularly fascinating to me from a functional medicine perspective, because there's dots that connect together physiologically about what we know about how stress affects the gut barrier, and then how the gut barrier affects the immune system being stirred up unduly and misrecognizing the self as enemy, sort of this low-grade autoimmune silent inflammatory storm that's simmering. So you don't have to poke it much to get a manifestation. And a lot of functional medicine patients who do yoga or mindfulness over time, or who become more peaceful, often just report that their dis-ease manifestations over time are less frequent and less severe, which also seems to clip to that ability to be with our experience and not try to push it away and not try to glom onto it. I always love
Mhm.
that word equanimity, that we don't push it
Mhm.
away, we don't grasp it, but
Mhm.
mindfulness and yoga do is sort of allow us to be with it.
Yes, yeah. It reminds me too of a metaphor that I often use in class. I'm always coming back to our breath. And so I often will talk about the inhalation as embracing an experience as is. It's welcoming, it's a receptivity. And then we have this pause at the top of our breath, where we linger, we hover for a moment, we take a look around, but then equally we release. We practice this non-attachment. We need to let go in order to make space for what comes next, and I think this is indicative of so many as we move through life, kind of something to remember, to with our breath also receive and take a look around and then to relinquish. So I do like metaphors and anecdotes, and in our many conversations we've had together, a lot of them stick with me. So
Every once in a while, I'll have somebody in my clinic who's not like their communication system doesn't, work around metaphors and analogies.
sure,
And
sure.
then I'll realize, oh my gosh, my toolkit's pretty bare. I'm so reliant on it. My brain is so much
Yeah.
built that way.
Well, and a lot of times it can, we learn through stories, so
Yeah,
it can be helpful. Most of us, but some, not everyone, we all have our learning styles. So
yeah,
all we can be is be ourselves, though.
right.
It's like whenever I present to a client or to a class, I say a prayer of just help me to be authentic. And
Hmm.
I think in putting ourselves authentically forward, we offer that space to whoever is in our midst to be themselves. And I often talk about growing our capacity, the capacity we have for ourselves, for graciousness, for gentleness, for generosity and patience. Only
Hmm.
to the capacity that we practice that with ourselves can we give as an offering to our spouse, to our children, to our neighbors, to our community, to the people we come into contact as we pass by. So, and I've been trying to make those passing interactions all the more meaningful as we connect via Zoom. And I'm grateful for these opportunities. I miss the exchanges, just I don't know, just I feel like I'm leaning in. When I see someone I do happen to know, we're maintaining distance, but there's this just wanting to linger for a little bit longer. And so I have really missed those personal connections during this time of, I've refrained from saying social distancing. I say physical distancing, because I think now more than ever, we need opportunities to connect to each other and to ourselves. And so,
Yes.
so yoga has been especially helpful for me, and it's been meaningful to teach. I remember our last in-person conversation, and we were talking about like when we have found what makes our heart beat, when we have found what we're passionate about, at the same time as we have these gifts given to us, we have a call to duty to share it, and in whatever capacity we can, and by no means does that mean we exhaust ourselves, that, day in, day out, that's our call to order, but it's what enlivens all of us. And I think to live a meaningful life, that is the biggest question we ask of ourselves, and so, so yeah, another reason it's been fun to be here with you today to share. So
I've found that the restrictions of the coronavirus pandemic have indeed then sweetened the sensibility then of people we know, people we value, people we share things that we're concerned about, our community, our friends, our acquaintances. Just there's this sort of, and I don't take it for granted, I never did, but less than ever do I take it for granted to see somebody I have a connection to. I loved what you were saying about goodwill toward others. I think that I personally, somewhat in my 20s and onward, one of my big struggles was, a tendency to judge or a tendency to have a grudge. And I've really been struck by how that's a big part of health. And I think one of the big benefits of mindfulness and yoga for me over many, many years was aspects of like loving kindness meditations, just literally having mantras of goodwill toward others and a policy of goodwill toward those I have adversity with. And I've been really struck by how then logging a lot of time with mindfulness and yoga has created, because sometimes it doesn't come naturally to me. I just find there's space, then there's a pause where I see that part of myself that reacts to things in ways sometimes that aren't so good or I'm not so proud of. But it sort of happens in the silence within me. And so much of the yoga and mindfulness emphasis over the years is on self-acceptance and acceptance of others. We all get to be in the sunlight of that.
Sure.
And I think it's really changed my sense of service. I think it's really changed my relationships with others. It really seems to have immunized me against things that happened in my 20s that would tend to spool up, relationships that would get worse and worse. I don't find that happening anymore. And I think it has to do with learning how to be more internally peaceful with more peaceful outward manifestations.
We can get caught up, in what we think other people are thinking or assuming or perceiving. And I was thinking about, where yoga kind of draws from India and the tradition of Hinduism and can relate to Buddhism. I was thinking about how there is perennial philosophies, the wisdom traditions, and was reminded of Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Toltec, from ancient Mexico and the Four Agreements. I don't know if you've ever read it, but in yoga, I often will draw on these themes of being impeccable with our word, not making assumptions, not taking anything personally. We always, or we never know what other people are putting forth. This happens even within the context of my husband, who I've been married to for 10 years. I'll say one thing and he hears another. And I really think, like you said, yoga can offer us an opportunity to understand our interiority, to kind of get to know the topography of all that we have within, to begin to know more readily what trips us up. And there'll be times, Dr. Downey, where I know the timing's not right and I don't have the words and I can see myself getting worked up. And yet I still make the decision to say something I don't want to or not in the right way. And yet what yoga also offers us is the grace of practicing ahimsa or metta, which ahimsa is the Sanskrit word for all loving kindness, which metta draws from the Thai tradition of, again, practicing this sense of tenderness with ourselves, and I like what Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron will talk about, the way that we reach back for a child's hands, that tenderness that we so readily just give to a child is the same loving kindness that if we can cultivate that for ourselves, we start from a very good place, because that's innately where we are. This is where we were, and we still are that child, even as we grow in our bodies. And
I really like all those things you shared. I just think they're so good, and I think they're so important. I think some of the most important things to talk about in these explorations of functional medicine are in the domains of mental, emotional, spiritual is at the center of the Institute for Functional Medicine matrix, in terms of if that part isn't addressed, if that part doesn't have spark in the chamber, the plan doesn't work. And myself included, there's been a lot of cartoons or cliches over the years about our emotional state or our compass heading of meaning, who we are, or whatever spiritual path we pick. And I find with the ideas you just flagged, often there's this false dichotomy that we're either hard on ourselves in this sort of American work ethic way, or if we're nice to ourselves, we're just giving ourselves a get out of jail free card for bad behavior. That there's no middle path for compassionate acceptance of the self and accountability. But that's what I see the people in my they're coming in, establishing with me or continuing work with me, and they're saying, well, my food plan isn't working, and then they'll immediately segue into beating up on themselves.
Sure.
I find that as, they eat whole food over time or something, we're often having a conversation about get into a compassionate space with yourself about what matters to you, let go of the beating up, stay accountable, but start with a place of peace and compassionate acceptance of yourself. And they almost visibly kind of just, oh my gosh, wow.
And I feel like, at least for me, it stems from our education. From the time we're little, we are taught to categorize and box and separate and bifurcate what is right and wrong and what is black and white. And it's only been in my adult life of seeing life as both and. Like in my classes, I'll talk about equally kind of setting an intention for our practice and welcoming the place we're at right now. Can we hold space for paradox and for both at the same time? Like using and both in the same sentence is okay. We don't need to be all in one side or the other, but yet life is this array, and it's complex, it's messy and it's beautiful. And it's important, I think, like you said, to not totally lean one way or the other, but we're somewhere on this continuum. And can we practice a little more grace with ourselves? So
right on.
And
right
humor
on,
it's so good to learn how to laugh at ourselves. Yoga's helped me, just to like balance poses. Why do we get so serious? We're gonna all fall out. It's okay. I want to tell you a really quick anecdote, if that's okay.
Great.
Recently have I've been sharing a lot of poetry in my classes. I feel like poetry offers this embodiment of human experiences that we all have, but I especially like Rumi's poem, The Guest House. And so in the poem, are you familiar with it?
No, but I love Rumi.
Okay, Rumi's wonderful. But he talks about this being human as a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, a dark thought, a shame, a malice. He personifies all of this array of what we feel, perhaps in a given day. And then he goes on to say, meet each one at the door laughing. Open the door and invite them in, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently strip your house empty of its furniture. Welcome and honor each guest kindly. He goes on to say he may be clearing you out for some new delight. And ending with saying that all that comes to you comes from beyond. It's an opportunity to learn and to grow. And even if grief or loss is part of that journey, we are making space. We are making space for what comes next. Although we can really trust in our fluctuations, we are part of the fluctuations. And I think it's important to remember that we are always changing, and we can choose to be participants in that change, or we can choose to not. But it's our choice and our agency to claim for ourselves. And I think, whether it's yoga or massage therapy, functional medicine, there are a number of modalities that are helpful to bring into our life and lifestyle and choices and looking at the relationships we give our energy to. I think it's important when we grow our mindfulness, we also become more aware of what has resonance for ourselves. And one of the biggest things I like to also bring forth in my conversations with clients and students is that, I have my own traditions, my beliefs. I grew up Catholic. I was raised with Christianity. Those are my fundamental traditions. I have chosen to draw upon wisdom lineages from around the world, and I will bring them in. But if by any means they don't resonate with you, I like the conversation. I was hiking with a gal once. Her grandmother always said, just put it on the shelf. Like, put it there for later. You don't have to accept or totally throw something away. If it doesn't have resonance or applicability to your life, just put it on the shelf. it doesn't need to take up space or your energy. Just put it on the shelf.
Mm.
So
Oh,
I think a lot happens on a hiking trail too, by the way. I just
right,
think
right.
when we are, if hiking's not your thing, but just sitting in nature or just getting out to ride a wave or,
Mhm.
be on a shoreline.
Mhm.
A lot happens when we're out and just giving ourselves a little more space to breathe. So.
Mm. Well, what you've articulated is, I find it poetic, and I think that the concepts are just moving, and I think that there are things that are of value to our listeners for some sort of mundane reasons. In that, part of what happens, I think, in the United States, as wonderful as it is we can end up with sort of these mechanistic experiences, that things are black or white, or thinking that every disease requires a procedure or a drug. And I think it's an important time to hear a a complex description of what it feels like to have momentum, and
Mhm.
for things to be changing in real time as we move
Mhm.
forward. And one thing I'd like to connect for people is that what you're describing, which is a state of openness to change, as the only thing that doesn't change is that we're always changing.
Mhm.
That's the gig. So we can,
Yeah.
our world's changing, our lives are changing, so we can participate or we can fight, but change
Mhm. Mhm.
is.
Right.
And then I think sometimes I've I've mentioned in a number of these interviews now, I've historically skipped the step where I stop to recognize the person's pain or suffering. So I currently don't talk to people much about flowing with, I don't talk to them about the blessings of adversity until I acknowledge the pain of the adversity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's such a beauty then I think, in getting into a flow state like you're describing. And one other thing I wanted people to know is that David Perlmutter is one of the sort of the brightest luminaries in the functional medicine world. He started making a big appearance with Grain Brain a number of years ago, and then
Yeah.
functional medicine neurologist out of Florida. He lectures at Harvard, et cetera. And his most recent book is called Brainwash. And the premise of brainwash, in a positive way, sort of washing your brain and getting into a receptive state, is that we default into this kind of narrow, fear-based stuckness, and we need to break that spell to be able
Mhm.
to heal, to be able to be optimal.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. To notice when we're projecting and how that begins to spiral faster and further out on the
Mm-hmm.
horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 Wow.
Well, let's make sure and include in the show notes, your website will be there and how to connect with you. And over time, it's going to be important for people to know they can work with you, your brick and mortar setting, or via remote. But it's particularly important right now. Can people work with you remotely if they're intrigued by what we're talking about, or they want to benefit from what you do professionally?
Absolutely. Yes. With this great pivot, I've been teaching weekly classes online, and the best way to access that is via my website. So
Mm-hmm.
please look in the show notes, and I would love to have you join me. I'm teaching
Right.
you as well as the audience.
Right.
I'm teaching
Right.
kind of a flow class, and then today I taught a hatha class, which bridges the sense of both movement and then finding stillness within the movement, within the postures. And my Wednesday class is one of my favorites. It's a twisting class, and we're
Yeah.
looking at mobility through the spine and all of the different planes that we move in, and how we can really initiate with core strength. And that was inspired, actually. My first yoga conference in New York 2 years ago, I went to a Rodney Yee and Colleen Sedman twist class, and it was the most powerful response I'd had to a class. Both this kind of emotional wash, cathartic cleanse, and then like a physiological response as well. So I think No two classes are alike, but I walked away thinking, oh, I got to teach this class. And it's been fun to put a spin on traditional poses too. And, you know, for those who are artists and really creative thinkers, it's a fun class to come to. So,
Great.
so thank you. Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, it'll be in the show notes, and then there will also be some people, like all of us, some people like to watch a recording, others like to read. And so this will also be a transcribed blog,
Oh,
which
wonderful.
will have links and what have you, and that one is more sort of distilled. So when I get carried away, my part just gets whittled down to short questions, and your part gets more center stage. But people will be able to see how to connect with you there.
Well, you have made some very important points yourself. So I certainly hope you're not. That reminds me of a movie, Lost in Translation, with Bill Murray, where he's in Japan, you know, and the Japanese person is giving a very long, you know, something, and then the translation is 3 words or something. You know, it's like it's narrowed down to the essential message or something like that. But that's
no,
funny.
Don't worry, they won't carve me out, but they'll
Oh, very good.
distill my part. And then people that you mentioned, the folks that do, I'm really fortunate to have a super gifted team who's taking these ideas that you and I care about or things that we worked hard to learn. So in the blog version, they'll put hyperlinks to the people you mentioned. So they can actually go learn more about those folks. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today with you and to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Art, for me, on behalf of me and the listeners, thank you. It's a big deal to have your time. And I know it was during some family time, which is precious. So greatly appreciated. And I think it's gonna ripple out there into the digital ether and make a really positive difference in a lot of people's lives. So.
Oh, well, thank you. And I look forward to sharing it as well. So.
Excellent. All right.
Okay.
Seaworthy exists for people to overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review if we've earned it, and going to our website podcast tab for any questions or comments you'd like to share with us. Thanks.